Should I go to full screen?
Yeah, we could do that. Then you can start. People are joining us now.
Okay.
Thank you.
How's the cat?
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're still having people join us, so I'm just going to wait another minute. Thank you. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to yet another webinar. A Shana Tova to you all, and may this be a healthy and happy new year for everybody. So on behalf of Next Generations and the Now for Holocaust Survivors Initiative at Morse Life Health System, I welcome you to yet another of our live webinars. We have 67 registered for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Jenny Frummer, and I'm the director of the Now for Holocaust Survivors Initiative, and I work closely with Next Generations as their director of strategic initiatives. A few words about your host organizations. Next Generations is committed to educating all ages about the lessons of the Holocaust and to mitigating anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hate by promoting respect and teaching the skills of how to be an upstander rather than a bystander. We also are committed to supporting Holocaust survivors and their offspring, the second and third generations, the next generations. We are obligated to support the authentic voices of Holocaust survivors. The Now for Holocaust Survivors Initiative provides services to Holocaust survivors in Palm Beach County. We work with local organizations and offer additional supplemental and expanded services to survivors and their families who live in Palm Beach County. Regardless of the care a survivor may already be eligible to receive through the generous grants from the Claims Conference allocated to Jewish Family Services and other agencies, a survivor and their family member may receive additional services paid for by this Now initiative. A unique feature of the program is the vast array of services available through Morse Life, which includes familiar traditional community-based services such as in-home care, as well as palliative hospice services in-home and on-site. Other critical services such as respite care, rehabilitation, memory care, skilled care, assisted living, and independent living communities are also offered at Morse Life campus. The Now initiative is fully embedded in a comprehensive health system at Morse Life, which is a premier organization providing services to older adults. This webinar today is partially funded by a grant from the Jewish Federations of North America and the Center for the Advancement of Holocaust Survivors Care. Just as a reminder, all of our webinars presented are live, and today Dr. Felsen will be sharing her extensive experience, insights, and research in working with Holocaust survivors and their families, and the unique perspective of art. Just a few housekeeping items before we proceed. All participants are muted because we are in broadcast mode. We cannot see you, and we will also not be able to hear you. However, at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat. Some of you have already found the chat button and are wishing everyone good Yom Tov. Thank you. And also there's a Q&A icon. And that's where you, during the webinar, at any time, if you have any questions, you can just put your questions in there. Dr. Felsen will talk for about 55 minutes, after which we will open it up for some questions. And please note that you can actually change the way you view your screen. You can have it in speaker mode, and or you can also follow along with the slides. The webinar will be recorded but will not be available until after the series. If you have requested information on continuing credits or continuing educational units, please be in touch with me directly. Tomorrow you will receive an email link to an evaluation for today's webinar. Some of you have been filling those out and we so appreciate your feedback. So please, if you get the link, please click on it. It shouldn't take you more than 2 or 3 minutes. Dr. Felsen's bio is available on the Next Generation's website. One last item, just as a reminder, if you share your unique link, you may be shut out because whomever gets on the call first or on the webinar first will have access. And if you've shared your link, you may not have access. So welcome to all. As always, I want to just give a shout out to my colleagues from Jewish Family Services and also anyone who may be joining us from the network of Jewish Human Service Agencies. And now it gives me great, distinct pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Felsen.
Thank you very much, my friend and colleague, Dr. Frumer. It is, of course, first of all, Shana Tova to all of you, and hopefully, Gmar Chatima Tova. May it be a good, blessed year for all of us. This time, we will start, of course, with the usual question. We like to know very much who is with us, so please fill it up as soon as you can.
And for those of you who are new to polling like this, you just sort of click on the one that you have, and you can also scroll down using the very thin gray bar on the right-hand side. And to remove this, once we share the results, you just click on it and it will close if you click on the X in the top right. Okay, I'm going to end polling now. Oh, a few more. I don't want to end it too soon. People are still clicking. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. And so 72% of you on the webinar today are children of Holocaust survivors. And I'm really pleased to see that we also have professionals with us today and educators. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And we have one more.
Yes. So as you know, just quickly today we'll talk about art, which is my other love other than psychology. And before we get into it, we quickly have a couple of questions. I don't remember, we have one or two this time.
Please. We have two more. This one and one
more.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, there's one up. No?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I reversed the order. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter.
No.
There are two more, and so I'm launching this poll. I believe that art, other than literature, is a meaningful way for 2Gs and 3Gs to express their experiences of Holocaust survivor families. Okay, I'm going to end this polling. and share the results. So 60% of you strongly agree, 24% agree, some are not sure, and
Yep.
2% strongly disagree. Okay, and there was a question about whether literature is art, but I'm going to let Dr. Felsen respond to that. And the last poll that we have today, thank you, is have you engaged in created art forms, again, other than literature, as a way to express your experience as the offspring of a Holocaust survivor? And you can pick as many as you want. Okay. Almost everyone has voted, so I'm going to end this polling and share the results.
So we have quite a few artists amongst us, and quite a few who maybe would like to and are not sure how to do that, how to start. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So it is my great pleasure and honor to be with you again today as we talk about the expression of Holocaust memory in art. And so I jotted down a few very common categories that are important as we look at art about the Holocaust. So we have images in art that are directly related to the Holocaust, related to collectively known and recognized themes. So, and you will see examples of it coming up very, very quickly, because I started with some images from art, both by survivors and children of survivors, to show those themes. Images related to the personal story of one's own parents, whether that story is made explicit or not by the artist, but when you know the artist or when you speak with the artist and you are informed that this is actually something related to the personal story. Then we have images that reflect the struggle of the second generation living with and growing up with direct evidence of the Holocaust in their parents, such as you will see in the art of one of the people that I will present, the number on the arm of the parent, the survivor parent. And we have images of the catastrophe that the Holocaust was without a specific time or place, so universalizing it. We have expressions of what I call the omnipresent absence, the void, that which was lost, that which is not here, that which is unknown, all kinds of manifestations that pertain to the void and to what is absent, but very conspicuously absent. Then we have ways in which the artists show us the complexity of memory, the layers of memory, the interplay between memory and forgetting. So images that evoke the questions: is it memory or is it an illusion? Whose memory is it? Is it our memory? Is it our parents' memory? And these types of things are represented in mirrors and blurry images, blurry boundaries between forms, between the forms and the background, stains and shadows that sort of speak to what is real and what is not, what is the intended form and what is the shadow or the stain and so forth. And indirect expressions include images of really of ideas, of conceptual ideas, such as images, indirect expressions and images of emotional self-restraint, of self-control, of silence that covers an emotional and an affective storm. And we'll see examples of it in the art coming up. So this is an example of images directly related to the Holocaust and directly evocative of an image that we're all familiar with of that child in that very famous photograph. This too, again, by a survivor, direct images of what we know collectively as the Holocaust. Then we have images that pertain to collective Jewish symbols and the destruction thereof. And here you have the fire. Here you have the baby carriage and the goat that's emptied and disemboweled. And then you have the universality of the Holocaust, the universality of the catastrophe that happened, as in the cube that says hate, and in the image of the weeping woman in the stone on the right. Here you have these two very amazing paintings, two out of six. 6 paintings for 6 millions was the name of the series of 6. And this particular one is called 2 out of many, humanizing and again speaking to who is remembered and who is forgotten. When you say millions, you forget the individuals. So this is 2 out of many in the series, 6 paintings for 6 millions. And here is another one from the series showing the destruction, the dehumanization of the individual, transforming from the people with their clothing and their relationships and their facial expressions to this dehumanized form that is still obviously belongs to a human being, but is in the inferno and is completely dehumanized. So here is the actual book cover of the book that describes my research with my colleague, Dr. Laub from Yale, my deceased colleagues. And I put it there because I wanted you to look and think at the art that we're going to see through the lens of the fact that these are unwanted memories of social trauma, as we chose for the title of our book. The study was about the most forgotten survivors of the Holocaust, which were those who were hospitalized in psychiatric institutions for many, many years, many decades, many of them. But the struggle of art with the Holocaust is also the struggle with unwanted memories that are either imposing themselves or the whole dialectics of what is remembered and what is forgotten. I call these the holes of memory, and I want to describe by this term one of the very striking features that is also part of the art that we will see, which is that memory is a very complex process, and it involves several very distinct phases. One is the registration of something, then there is the encoding of what we registered, what we saw, what we experienced, and then we have the retrieval of that memory once the memory becomes a memory and we are no longer experiencing it. And the problems with memory can occur in each of these phases. And each of these phases, when the registration is not appropriate, for example, because of extreme shock, when the encoding is inappropriate, also because of tremendous emotional upset or because of shock, and when the retrieval is problematic, we get amnestic holes in the memory where very important things that took place seem to be erased, or the person cannot remember them. They cannot remember that that happened. And sometimes it's extremely dramatic. So for example, my mother, who was a very, very realistic person, could not see the face of her own mother when she would want to see her face in her mind's eye, but she could see her in her sleep, in dreaming, which means that the mind actually did have, of course, she registered the face of her mother for those years before the war. Of course, it was encoded, but the retrieval was prevented by some very powerful emotional processes. However, the memory clearly lived in her mind because in sleep, those defenses relaxed and she could see her mother's face. In the same way, somebody else told me about her father, who could see his mother's apron and her hands kneading dough in the kitchen, but he could not lift his eyes in his memory to see his mother's face, because the face, I guess, was so associated with so much pain, so much loss, that memory prevented that retrieval. So child survivors in particular experience holes in their autobiographical memory, also due to the fact that they were very young and that they lacked a lot of information. So that complicates and creates more holes even than the emotional blockage of certain memories. The absence, however, as I said, is a conspicuous, omnipresent absence. It is not something that is not there and we don't feel it, but it actually is more like a psychic black hole, something that is very powerful and has a lot of influence in the life of both child survivors and children of survivors. So what we don't know has a lot of influence as much as the stuff that we do know and do remember. And so for the children of survivors, there is another confusion in their art and in their experience about whether our memories, which I put here between two quotation marks, are real, or are they actually a figment of our own imagination, an illusion, something we make up? And many times it is remarkable how diffuse these boundaries are. So as you've heard me say before, I think that it's a very powerful quote, which is relevant to many of our conversations. As my friend Dori Laub said, children of survivors of the Holocaust view the world from a vantage point of a catastrophe that ravaged their families. And that is indeed the starting point of art by the second generation. That dual reality that we spoke about in previous conversations, that means that children of survivors have this double vision of reality, reality as they know it in the countries and time in which they have actually lived their own lives, and the reality of trauma which they have never experienced, and yet is very, very relevant in our psychological world. I gave you in previous conversations the example of the photograph by my friend from Haifa, who photographed a vineyard in the snow. And as I told you, the reaction often of survivors and children of survivors to this photograph is as if we are seeing emaciated Holocaust survivors in the morning appel, the morning roll call in the snowy, concentration camp. So memory has many paradoxical qualities. It is actually there and not there. It is something that we are thinking of, and then it is there in our minds while it's not really there in reality. It's present and not present. It's material and immaterial, and it can be ethereal and fleeting. And at the same time, it can be, when a powerful memory is experienced, it can be very real and compelling, And like in the picture of the vines in the snow, the memory can actually overpower the perception and interpretation of the actual reality that we're seeing. And we will see that in many of the art items that I'll show. So for trauma survivors themselves, there are many particular forces that, such as I mentioned, as shock and intense fear, that create those amnestic holes in the various phases of encoding, registering, and retrieval of aspects of trauma. And traumatic moments are therefore often remembered only as fragments. They may feel very hazy. They may feel very unreal. And many times I've heard even survivors who are adults during the Holocaust say, I barely believe my own memories because they're so terrible and so dissociated in a way, as many traumatic memories are. Or they can be felt as very, very strong feelings without a particular reference story or thought or image that goes with it. And I can explain more when we talk about it, perhaps in the question and answer. Another very important part about, or fact about memory is that it is not static. And we know now in terms of brain studies that memories change by subsequent retrievals. They don't stay the same like a photograph that when we can look at many times and it just stays the same. Memory actually changes each time we retrieve it. And for the second generation, the fragmentation is even more significant with regards to the representation of trauma, because the issue of knowing and not knowing is further complicated, much more enigmatic, and many times is related to the nonverbal way in which parental memories and responses were experienced. So we'll go past that one. And the other thing about trauma that we see in some of the pictures and some of the arts is that presentness of trauma. Trauma is a state of a memory that never becomes really a past memory like other memories. Whenever it is evoked, it always maintains that perpetual sense of vivid presentness, vivid experience. It never becomes a memory like other things. And there is an interplay both on the individual level and on the social level between remembering and forgetting of trauma. So the photographs that we will see in a second show you one way of handling it. Here is the incredibly thick book, many pages, all of them, as you can see on the left, covered with the names of the victims. Many names, the book of names. And on the other hand, the one pair of shoes of one single young child. So what is remembered and what is not remembered? The 6 million, the many names, but not that one individual single child. The Writing on the Wall is a project that was done by Shimon Ati in taking old photographs of Jewish life and projecting them on buildings in the old ghetto, the old Jewish ghetto. And I think that it's one of the most powerful depiction of the complexity of memory and how memory in the second generation is there, and yet it's something we never saw, we never lived through. But yet, when you look at this wall right there, you do see something that was never there in your own lifetime, is not really there right now in terms of the man is not there, but the memory, the picture in your own mind is there. So it's a very, I think, nuanced and sophisticated treatment of the issue. And here is another example, the Bet Mischar Sfarim, the Buchhandlung, the bookstore, and the kosher store there, grocer there. So the images of the fragmentation, confusion, and vagueness that we will see in some of the pictures that I'll show you soon pertain to the holes of memories, the questions of the reality of the memory and the missing, the unknown information, the information that gets lost with time, the information that was dissociated because it was too painful, all of the types of ways in which memory is not whole, not complete. And the also what we call the disintegrative impact of traumatic memories on the perception of current reality. So both the imperfections and the holes in the memory of the trauma as it was registered, as it is remembered, and also the corrosive and disintegrating impact that traumatic memories have on the adequate perception of current reality. So here is an example from the works by Joni Schwartz, second generation. You see the picture of the sacred ground on the right, and you see the disintegrating hole in the picture on the left that depicts these processes that I just spoke about, how the sacred ground in which terrible things happen, the memory of it, how it is disintegrating, how its impact is psychologically disintegrating, and all the other things we talked about. On the other hand, traumatic memories are also often associated with hypermnesia, a hyper acute memory for certain details of the traumatic moment. And that is, I think, beautifully shown in this picture by Hanka Kornfeld, who's actually a survivor, but it's also, you will also see it in some of the pictures in the second generation art. So one of the main questions that pertains to the second generation experience, as well as to second generation experience as it's manifested or expressed in art, is how can we remember what we actually haven't seen? And I thought that another very sophisticated and nuanced way of treating this question was in this art project by Maya Sachs, who attempted to recreate the actual furniture and actual details of a room according to the detailed verbal report of a survivor describing the living room in his parents' home. And that's an attempt to actually concretize the process of imagining and recreating a reality based on information which is perceived by the children of survivors, both explicitly, as in this project, and implicitly in the ongoing relationships that we have had with our parents. And it also addresses in a very interesting and concrete way the question, to which extent does the outcome in the experience and memory of the children of survivors resemble the original reality of the lives of our parents, the good parts, the bad parts, all of it. And I actually mentioned here the filmmaker, Debbie Goodstein, who traveled to Poland to explore the experiences of her family members. And she describes in the beginning of a documentary called Voices from the Attic, the presence in her own mind and of the experiences that occurred before she was born. I think it's a worthwhile documentary. This is a picture of the project by Maya Sachs, the recreated living room, the way that you could see it in the gallery when it was presented, while you were listening to the verbal description of the survivor, I'm sorry, whose parents' living room he was describing. Sorry about the fact that Voices from the Attic was not there before. This is an example of what I called the direct evidence, living with the direct evidence of our parents' experiences. The number that Lev Gal Wertman, who is an artist, a second generation living in New Jersey, created with the number of I believe it was his father's number on his father's arm, and the SS, what should I call it? The tattoo, sorry. So the two of them next to each other. The SS tattoo, of course, is not something that he experienced directly, but his father's tattoo, which he lived with. On the other hand, the question of whose memories is expressed much more abstractly in this kind of art by the second generation, also by Lev Gal. Look at the difference between this very concrete depiction of direct evidence, having lived with that, and this abstract painting, which in many ways deals with the question of the dual reality, if you like, what is above the glass floor, as I called it, what is the reality that's above, that's colorful, the reality of the lives of the second generation as they've lived it, and the reality underneath that line that still separates, if you see the whole, the circles are whole, but part of them is sunken down. So part of the very real existence and experience of the second generation is in this underworld of the dual reality, the reality of the trauma, which doesn't have quite the same strong colors. It's not the real reality in which they live, but it's a very powerful part of their experience. And there's all kinds of strange things there, which we don't exactly see and understand. What is it? Is it a machine? Is it a gate? Is it a gallows? It's not really clear. And so what is underneath and what is above are the intended forms, the circles outlined in black there, or the whole shape with the color part included? What is the right shape, if you like, and what is a stain? Is the right shape the circle and the other stuff is somehow bleeding out of it? Or is the real shape as intended the whole thing, including what bleeds out, which is a way to treat the question of superimposed trauma? What was the original personality? What was the original life meant to live? And what was superimposed by trauma? And how are the lives of survivors and their children different from what they were supposed to be? I think it also is a very interesting treatment of the questions of what is me and what is not me or not mine in the experience of the child of survivors, which is expressed in the blurring of the boundaries between the inside and the outside, as I said, between the form and the bleeding color outside. What is me and what is not me? What is mine and what is not mine? What are my memories, my experiences, and what is somebody else's? And also a blurring of the boundaries between inside and outside, and all of those representing the blurring of the boundaries that we talk about in psychology between the generations, the transposition of memories of the parents onto the second generation through a sort of osmosis that happens through the emotional relationship with the parents, and the sense of sometimes not knowing what is ours as second generation and what is theirs, and to which extent there is a separation between these two. Indirect images, as I said, often pertain to concepts, to affects that are very much part of the experience of the second generation. So self-restraint and self-control are some of the characteristics of children of survivors as we see them in psychological work with the second generation. And it is likely that these responses are related to a lot of the things that we talked about in some of the previous meetings. The survivor parents transmitted a certain hypervigilance, a certain mistrust of the world, a certain need to be always alert, always scanning for danger, and always in control, so as not to be caught helpless, so as not to be caught in a way that you will be victimized. And that is part of the need to develop that sense of self-restraint, self-control. I will show you in a minute the other item by Lev Gal, entitled aluminum object, which is a form that appears very mechanistic, very metallic, very hard, very polished, and very closed. It's the opposite of human, of feeling, of emotional. In contrast, another item by Lev Gal is titled Young Woman, which is an organic seeming form painted in very hot colors, which appears as if its physical integrity has been very, very violently injured. It appears to have exploded. Here you have it. It appears to have exploded, to bleed out, to be very injured. And as I said, and in addition to that, in addition to that, there are many eyes in this image, which I think call forth, as eyes do many times, a sense of mistrust, of hypervigilance, of having to look very much around, to be always watching against danger. So if you like, these two, especially as I put them juxtaposed against each other, show that kind of dialectic tension between the self-restraint and the self-control that covers the trauma, that covers an affective storm underneath this very controlled and very closed surface. And it's a very interesting way of putting into this kind of expression the processes that we call in psychology hardening or steeling. We actually use these terms to describe how survivors were able to continue in life after the Holocaust, after such unbelievably atrocious, horrific experiences and losses. So they steeled themselves, they hardened themselves, they closed off the memories, they put it in a closed and hardened place. They also themselves, in a way, sometimes, and different people to different degrees, were experienced as a little bit hardened emotionally, and they were able with that kind of hardening to push through, to go through the difficulties of surviving emotionally and physically and rebuilding a life. But underneath that is the trauma, the pain, the bleeding, the amorphous and coexistent damage that is always there. And another type of art which I wanted to share with you, and which I strongly recommend that you go and look at online. You know, if we had the possibility in terms of the technology, I would be showing you snippets of these videos, but it's not possible to do that well enough on Zoom. So Rose Jacobs, the daughter of her survivor mother, filmed her own lifelong art project called Finding Kalman, which is the expression of her lifelong fantasy of finding her mother's little brother who was lost in the Holocaust, and expressing the wish that so many of us as second generation had and have, to make it better for our parents. The impossible task that many children of survivors have shouldered to try and somehow make things better and outbalance the losses. So Anna Huberman Jacobs, Rose Jacobs' mother, expresses in the documentary the coexistence of pain and joy in life after the Holocaust, which both remain in her experience forever there, both the capacity to move on and to celebrate, and the pain over over the people that she lost and her young boy brother that she lost. And as I said, moving on relied both on hardening, on the capacity to push away the pain and concentrate on the present and the future, as well as on the tremendously important connection that other survivors created, that survivors created with other survivors. And that is also very beautifully and very gently documented in in many of the documentaries by children of survivors, which have proliferated lately, in the home style movies of the Jacobs family, parts of which are included in the documentary Finding Kalman, excuse me, and also in a documentary called The Four Seasons Lodge, which depicts the connection, the decades-long connections between survivors as they all would gather year after year in the Poconos, in the bungalow colonies, and as they accompanied each other throughout life until old age. These are some of the images of Finding Kalman by Rose Jacobs. And again here, her mother over there, and some more pictures, including part of the photograph that survived of Kalman, the brother. And I really recommend watching it. At least the trailer is available online. So another aspect that I would like to touch upon quickly, I think I have until 3 o'clock, right, Jenny? Okay. So the burden of parental trauma is certainly also an aspect of the experience of the second generation. And it was very poignantly expressed in art by Linda Friedman Schmidt. So for many of us, in many cases, indeed, children had to take on a lot of premature responsibilities, either because the parents didn't speak English, couldn't deal with all kinds of things. And so I have many examples where people tell me that at the age of 9, they had to write their parents checks, they had to deal with the landlord who spoke only English and who needed to be negotiated with, all kinds of things like that. And also, of course, when survivor parents were depressed or anxious or too sick to navigate the new culture. So for many children of survivors, the weight of these premature responsibilities, the weight of the awareness of what the parents have endured was very heavy, preventing them from having the normative childhood and adolescence that other American children or Israeli children had, preventing them from feeling free to explore their own individuality and limiting their sense of autonomy. So here is some of the here are some of the works that that show that. Here is the very, very good girl dressed in very European or very modest clothing with the two braids, and the parents applauding the good girl as long as she's continuing to be that girl which they need her to be. And then you have the adolescent or young adult closing her ears to the parental message, wearing something much less modest, cutting her hair in a very sort of punky hairdo, a very different thing. And here again, you know, the girl who's like a doll, a little frozen, a little terrified, also a little terrifying in her almost dehumanized sort of depiction, held by the proud, loving survivor dead. And here is the young woman, so incredibly tied and bent by the connection to the aging mother that she cannot get away from and cannot be her young, autonomous, independent, free person, because she's so connected to that. Very jarring art. On the other hand, what we also know is that there is a tremendous amount of post-traumatic growth, both in survivors and in the children of survivors. And that actually the symptoms of the distress caused by trauma, or what we call symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, are positively correlated with the degree of post-traumatic positive growth. It's as if, in fact, the distress pushes us, drives us to make meaning, to recognize what is really most important to us in life, to get insight into what actually is the most valuable to us. So those are aspects of post-traumatic growth. And they have been reported to be associated with a greater appreciation of life, a focus on the value and the importance of intimate relationships, a greater sense of one's own strength because we know what we were able to withstand, to endure, and also a recognition of new possibilities for one's life and spiritual development. So here I brought you a couple of examples of a beautiful, beautiful artist, Agnes Adler from New Jersey, celebrating life and family after the Holocaust. And again, another one, rebirth and renewal, the bond between mother and child. Here are some of the typical paintings that Paul Kor created throughout his life. The same artist who, when he was a child survivor, and when he was very old at the end of his life, did he create the series that actually depicted directly the Holocaust, the series that I showed you in the beginning, 6 paintings for the 6 millions. But throughout his life, his paintings actually depicted this type of images of artistry, of entertaining figures, of couples in this very dreamy fantasy-like world. He also was the author of some of the most beautiful children's books in Israel. This one called in English, The Rainbow Fish. No, it's not The Rainbow Fish. Only The Rainbow Fish by him was translated to English to the best of my knowledge. But both the stories and the execution, the artistic execution of his books for children is exceptional. And the message is always about how unique each of us is and how each of us can do something to repair the world. And those are issues and topics of really very much post-traumatic growth. Hannah Kesselman, another survivor, spoke about the fact that what drives her art is she doesn't want to paint dark objects, but to try to show the world as it should be, bright and beautiful. So, and what she said in her own words was, when she spoke about her art, was that creating this kind of art, despite her traumatic past, is a way that helps her enhance her own positive emotions. This is Hannah's art, very colorful, very much about the beauty and the pleasures of nature, of art, of eating together, of enjoying the simple pleasures of life. And we see the same kind of post-traumatic growth in Linda Friedman Schmidt's artwork, the same woman who so poignantly depicted the difficult burdens of second generation. But you see here the post-traumatic growth that is manifested in protest against racism, in promoting social justice, and in working towards positive change in the world. I just wanted to add, as a very kind of few last words, that in the very, very recent time, a recent paper by a colleague and friend of mine from Israel, Professor Amit Shrira, and his colleagues from Bar Ilan University, they described the results of interviews with 30 older visual artists, all child survivors ranging between the ages of 72 and 94. And they said that in their interviews with these survivors, a few themes came through very powerfully. And I chose these two themes to share with you because I think they're also so important in the art of the second generation. And they described one theme as turning outward from a world of threat to a world at which to wander, where the raw trauma becomes the material with which to work. And the second theme is one that captured accounts of the survivor artists that describe very much like Hannah in the previous, this artist here, that describes how creating art is a way of connecting with others. And it's not only about connecting with others interpersonally by showing the art to other people, which of course is a very important aspect of becoming an artist. You do want to show your art, you do want to connect with people through it. And of course, art has a way of connecting through portals very different from literature or documentaries. But also, and no less important, is the reconnecting with the world internally, or what my friend Dori Laub spoke about when he said, repopulating our internal world with positive objects. So creating art helps these artists, whether they're the survivors or the second generation, reconnect both interpersonally and intra-psychically with the feeling that we can connect with others, that there are others worth connecting with, that connection is a way to be in the world, is possible, and that we can work towards that, and we can also hang on to that feeling of connecting. Thank you very much. I think we stop here and we move to questions and answers. Thank you very much. I don't hear you.
Dr. Felsen, thank you so very much. This was a really fascinating presentation, and I learned a lot, as I always do, but I really enjoyed seeing the visual arts. And so the first question relates to this presentation. When we talk about art, it seemed that we excluded literature. So I wonder if you can comment on that, please. There have been a couple of questions about that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, I love art and I love literature. And if I even share with you, my children, whenever they see me holding a book, and my children are not young, they've known me for well over 20 years by now, each of them, and they say, "Oh, Mom, did you get another book about the Holocaust?" So I really read a lot of literature by the second generation, by survivors. I am very, very much into it, but maybe just because of it, I think it's a completely separate discussion. I could not do justice to visual art and to literature about the Holocaust in one and the same conversation. I just couldn't. Maybe because I love each of these aspects so much and find so much meaning in each of them.
Thank you. Another question was, do you think there's any differentiation, or could you comment on whether there are differences between 2G and 3G, grandchildren of survivors, specifically as it relates to sort of fading memories, and how do we pass that on, and what about those images and how to keep them alive?
Yes, there definitely are differences, and some of the differences, what is the valence that we attach to these differences will be probably something that we'll talk about in the question and answer part of the webinar about the third generation. But definitely there are differences. They know on one hand very different knowledge. They have very different knowledge about the Holocaust, because on one hand, they did not grow up with Holocaust survivors. They did not absorb the the multi-layered transmission of information, whether through tiny fragments that are verbal and all the other non-verbal communications that the second generation has. So we know a lot of little things that they have no way of knowing on one hand. On the other hand, third generation many times had a very different relationship with elderly survivor grandparents. And sometimes they actually got to hear much more coherent stories with a timeline from the grandparents, which the parents, when they were younger, could not share with the second generation in that way. Also, the third generation is a generation that grew up at a different time. They have all of the technologies at their disposal. The the Berlin Wall fell. There are a lot of sources of documentation and information which have become available online, and they go and look at it, they check it, they go on trips which we couldn't go to when we were young, to various parts of Eastern Europe. So there are things they know that we don't. There are things we know that they don't. There is a lot of, there are a lot of differences, and there's also a lot of differences in the feelings about these things. And I think we'll talk a lot more specifically about it in the webinar we dedicated to that. Yes.
Great, thank you. Would you mind moving to the very last slide so people can have our contact information?
Oh, of course. I'm so sorry. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Felsen.
Oh, I just wanted to show this very amazing picture, just because it depicts so beautifully the art of the grandmother survivor and the three generations of Hanka Kornfeld martyr. Yes. And the last.
Thank you, just so that people know how to be in touch with us if they want to be. There was a question and also one comment about, you speak about post-traumatic growth. And so there was a question about how does art, or does the visual art also project hope and survival as it relates to post-traumatic growth, the positive relationship that you talk about, how we're driven to try and make meaning of life and find the hope, if you will, in visual art.
I think that that was actually a very, very beautiful, concise summary of what I hope this talk was about. Yes. Yes, I think that this is what art does primarily for the artist, first of all, and for us in participating in that experience by observing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the last question, and there are many thanks in the chat, so thank you for that. For those who responded that they don't really sort of know where to start, right? But they feel that they want to express themselves, anything that you can encourage, share?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think that that's really important. I personally, you know, I think I skipped a couple of slides at the end to make it possible for us to have more time, but one of them was consider your legacy. Consider what you would like to try and paint or write, or whichever way is more comfortable for you, and just start doing it. And if you recall, Jenny, in the first webinar, after the first webinar, we sent out small sort of exercises that I adopted from, I believe, from Penny Baker, about just little writing exercises that say, just sit down every day for this much time and just start writing, whatever it is. Don't think about the grammar, don't think about the fancy words, just start writing. And I think this is a way, just start painting, just start doing something. Don't judge yourself, don't think about how it will look. And sometimes just starting something gets us rolling, and you never know where it will take you to. It's a beautiful journey, and it's something that no better time than COVID time to try to finally get to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very, very much. And someone has shared that they express themselves through movement
Yes, of
and
course.
dance.
Of
So there are
course.
many
Yes,
ways to express ourselves, visual arts being one way to capture that
absolutely.
specifically through time.
Absolutely. And that's what the narrow, relatively narrow angle that I chose to focus on in this particular talk. But yes, and there is a very moving video, which maybe I'll try to find for you, of using movement in working, in helping nurses during COVID time.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to find it. If I find the link to it, I will
Yeah.
share it with you and you can share it with the participant.
Okay, and I really ask if you are interested in receiving any follow-up information, anything that was mentioned in terms of links, please email me directly. It's jennyfrumer@jfrumer.com so that I can respond to you. It's just really challenging to send out this many emails to a group. So please let me know if you're particularly interested. I would appreciate that. And Dr. Felsen, toda rabah. Thank you so very, very much
Sana tova to everybody, and
for,
thank you for
for a
being together at this time.
yes, thank you all for attending. And Dr. Felsen, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Be safe, everybody.
גמר חתימה טובה. Jenny, I'm gonna call you.
Please. I think, Martine, are you going to close us up? Thank you.